Ah! What is up, YouTube? So, I'm behind the drum set today because today we're talking about practice. Some of you might remember a couple weeks back I posted a video on practice, and it was just kind of about how I structure my practice, how I break it up. And I break it up into 3 sections. There's a whole video on that. I'll put the link in the description if you want to watch how I structure my practice. I said, if you guys want to know what I practice, let me know. And a bunch of you asked me, what do I practice? Not just how do I set up my practice, but what do I actually practice? So today we're going to talk about what I practice. So let me preface this by saying this is what I practice because these are the things I want to work on. It's definitely not what I think you should practice. Maybe you should, but maybe you have something totally different that you want to practice, that you need to practice. So this is all just what I practice, not what I think you should practice. This is a very individualized thing. And I think that anyone who practices this stuff will get better, but it might not be what needs to be highest on your priority list of what you need to practice. So, all that's out of the way, let's jump into it. So, if you'll remember, that first section is like the maintenance and the technique section, and that, for me right now, what that looks like is 2 different things. One is the subdivision pyramid, and I've talked about the subdivision pyramid a lot. I have a whole ebook video masterclass thing on it on my website, link in the description. But the subdivision pyramid, and I sent this out to my email list a while ago. The subdivision pyramid is a system for how you can use rudiments, and while at the same time you're working on rudiments, you're working on a foot pattern, you're working on coordination. I love the subdivision pyramid because it gets you warmed up and it works on a ton of things at once. So what I'm doing with the subdivision pyramid right now is I have a foot pattern that I find especially challenging, which I saw Chris Coleman do in a solo. So the kick drum's happening every 3/16 notes, but you're playing in 4/4. So the foot pattern sounds, the hi-hat will be on quarter notes, and the kick drum will be playing a dotted 8th note. So that sounds like this. As you can tell, when you start getting into triplets over that foot pattern, it gets weird because it's a very 16th based foot pattern. That's what I'm doing right when I sit down at the drum set, is I'm working on doing different subdivisions over that foot pattern, and within those subdivisions also doing different rudiments. Again, I have a whole ebook about this. Go check that out if you want to know more about this specific thing. But that's what I do first. And then the second thing is I'm really working on alternating hand-foot patterns. This is something I've never been good at. I want to really hone in and focus on getting better at alternating between hand and foot. Mainly because, not because I think I'm going to have to use this all the time, but I just can't do it. And anytime I encounter something I just really can't do, it kind of indicates to me something is broken in my technique. So I've really been trying to, just focus in on that and really dial that in. That also gives me better independence, and it also really works on building up my speed, both hand and foot. So it's not a bad thing to practice that no matter what, even if it seems like it's kind of a pointless task. So that's what that first 20 minutes looks like in my practice. Now, as for the second 20 minutes in my practice, that looks a lot more like, and if you'll reference the other video, that's kind of the bulk of your work. That's kind of the stuff you don't know that you need to work on and really dissect, take slowly. And what I'm doing right now is for the first time in a really, really, really long time, I'm working through some transcriptions. As a lot of you know, I do a lot of transcribing, but it's been a long time since I've actually sat down and learned them, because I think that transcription should be a vehicle for unlocking more about your playing, not they shouldn't be about you just learning exactly what's on the page and then, running with it, right? So a lot of times the transcribing I've done, I'll find one little chunk and then really explore that measure or that fill or whatever and make it my own. But I've just been recently going back to transcribing, learning some fills that, are a lot of fills these days, I think, come pretty naturally. And even if I can't play them, I can't like sight read them, I'm like, oh yeah, I have something like that in my bag. So I've really tried to find some fills that I just never think of or very unnatural to me, and I'm working through those, learning them verbatim, and it's really nice. It feels really, really good. It's been a really long time since I've thought about fill vocabulary and stuff like that, because after a while, as a professional, I've found a lot of stuff that works for me and that I can play in any situation, and I just use that stuff. But it's always good to dive back in and say, okay, what makes me really uncomfortable, why, and what can I work on to get less uncomfortable and more comfortable with that stuff. So the second portion of my practice really looks a lot like working out transcriptions, fills, and then it sometimes bleeds into my third section. So the third section I've been working on in my practice time is, again, it's supposed to be all about music. Take what you're warmed up now. You've worked on really hard stuff. You've warmed up. You've worked on rudiments, whatever. Now let's play some music. And I've been finding some really challenging arrangements, play-along tracks, and I've been sight reading them. And then I've also just been working them out and trying to get them, like performance perfect. Even though I'm not performing them, trying to get them as perfect as possible. So the sight reading portion, I have a couple of Dave Weckl play-along tracks, which he makes some amazing arrangements for play-alongs. A lot of play-alongs are usually very copy and pasted, like, this A section, this B section, this C section, this A section, and then you're done. And they don't have a lot of arrangement, and I find that playing that stuff is fun and it's great and it can work on certain skills, but it doesn't often mirror a real music arrangement where the first verse is different than the second verse. At the end of the second course, there's this little extra tag here that didn't happen after the first course. Music arrangements can be very difficult, and I feel like, and the arranging and the figures and all of that stuff, I feel like often lacks in a lot of play-along tracks. But Dave Weckl's play-along tracks are amazing because they're very much like a big band or a jazz ensemble would arrange it, where there's a lot of different figures depending on which repeat you're taking. There's a lot of first and second endings. There's a lot of codas. There's a lot of things that I find most play-along tracks lack. So I've been working through that stuff. So sometimes the solo sections are complicated. The one that I was working on today, it's in 7/8, and then it's an 8-bar phrase, and in the 4th bar and in the 8th bar, there's these different figures that you have to catch while you're soloing. That's not necessarily the hardest thing in the world, but when I sight read the tune, I definitely didn't nail it the first take. So I had to sit down, and for the first time, I'm using the app Polynome, which is really useful in practice, because if you encounter some kind of, if you're learning a song and you encounter a solo section, or, maybe the end of a tune has a lot of figures that you're having a hard time catching, you can program it in Polynome, which I always used to do in GarageBand or Logic, but that's a whole nother step you have to take. You have to make time to sit down at your computer and then bounce it out and then put it on your phone, and it's a whole thing. And in Polynome, you can just make it right there and then practice right there. So I've really enjoyed Polynome, and I've been isolating some of the more difficult sections and like soloing over them to just get it in my veins, make sure that I'm not thinking about counting or anything. I'm getting so used to that solo section that I don't have to count. I'm just playing and catching the figures when I need to. So that's kind of what the third section looks like. It's partly sight reading these arrangements, and then when I get more comfortable, it's fine-tuning these arrangements, And I think that sight reading obviously only works the first or second time, but when these arrangements are so difficult, the sight reading is challenging. These songs are in 7 and go to 4, and then there's a bar of 7, but then it goes back to 4, and it's really challenging. So it's been, that third section is more about the music, but there's still things like sight reading and working out these difficult solo sections that are very much practice. I'm not just jamming and playing what I already know. That's what my practice looks like now. But if you ask me in 2 weeks, it might look different. It just depends on how I feel after 2 weeks of working on this stuff. Do I feel like it's actually benefiting? Do I feel like I'm making progress? If not, do I need to change what I'm doing? And I will say that this is the first time I've been working on the alternating singles between hand and foot for a long time, and I've just never been good at it, and I've tried different things, and for the first time I'm kind of working on it in a way that I actually think I'm seeing progress. So it sometimes just takes a really long time to find something that's going to work your whatever you're trying to improve at specifically enough for who you are as a drummer and where you're at. So that's a quick lesson about what I'm practicing. Like I said, you can watch the other lesson about how I think about and break up practice. That's in the description. You can also, the subdivision pyramid, which I talked about earlier, that's in the description if you want to know more about that. And that's it for now. Put in the comments, what do you practice? What are you practicing, or what do you need help and you wish you knew how to practice or what to practice to get better at it, but you just haven't found the right thing? Just put in the comments whatever you're thinking about practice. If you like this lesson, hit subscribe, press the little notification bell. I don't know if that does anything, but it's there, so if you want, press it, and see you in the next lesson.